What is happening, everybody? We got UFC 307 headlined by Alex Pereira. Once again, it feels like he headlines, I don't know, like once a month or something like that this year. Frequently, we're seeing Alex Pereira at the top of these big UFC pay-per-views. And in this video, we're going to break down everything you need to know to build your DraftKings lineups, going fight by fight, and then using the simulations here at Stokast to figure out who it is that I'm going to be getting the most exposure to. Only thing I ask while you're watching this is to do me a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are quickly approaching 100,000 subs on this channel. Probably going to be there within less than a week, probably a few days or so, maybe even by the end of football Sunday. So if you guys are not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do it. Also, going to be doing a giveaway for this card where I think it's a really interesting card for punts, and I want to know who it is that you guys are targeting for cheap. So let me know below in the comments which fighter priced under $7,800. So fighter priced underneath Juliana Pena is going to score the most fantasy points this weekend. One person who gets the answer correct, I will select you to get a free subscription to our MMA simulation. So if you guys are interested in free stuff, just let me know below. Which fighter priced under $7,800 scores the most fantasy points? But let's get to it and start breaking down the card, beginning with the main event. Alex Pereira taking on Rountree Jr. And Rountree doesn't belong here, if we're being honest. If you look at his recent strength of schedule, while he is on a 5-fight win streak, a lot of the wins are against lower-level opponents, or they're just fights that I frankly don't think he won. Like the fight against Dustin Jacoby, for instance, that was a split decision that Rountree won, but I thought there was a strong case to say that Dustin Jacoby should have won that fight 30-27. Solidly outlanded him 120 significant strikes to 85 significant strikes. And then you have these other wins. He beat Chris Daukaus. Like, okay, Chris Daukaus, not really UFC caliber talent. Anthony Smith, he's somebody who's pretty washed at this point in his career. His other wins are against Modestas Bukauskas, Carl Roberson. I don't think either of them are still on the UFC roster. So you've got this win streak that's been put together by Rountree, and I don't know that any of them are all that quality of wins. Even the Anthony Smith one, it's probably more competitive than you remember it being. He got the finish in the third round, but I mean, the total strikes in that fight, it was 53-47, and now he gets thrust into a title fight, at least in part, I think, because the UFC kind of wants to avoid having Alex Pereira fight any wrestlers. So he is going to get a striking-based matchup for sure against Rountree Jr. Rountree has a puncher's chance to win the fight, but I don't know, like 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, I do think Pereira ends up winning this fight. The one issue with him from a DraftKings perspective, he's $9,600 and doesn't have any wrestling upside. And at $9,600, you are probably going to need like 115 or more fantasy points out of Pereira to be in the optimal lineup. And what's the path for him to score that amount of fantasy points as just a striking-based fighter? He probably is going to need the quick finish bonus. If Pereira does not get a finish in the first minute of the fight, I think he is probably likely to not be in the winning lineup. So Pereira, I'm not going to write him off entirely just because I do think that there are some question marks with a lot of the pay-up options on the slate, but this is not a main event that I'm going to be massively invested in. I'm pretty confident Pereira wins, but just because, like I said, I think he's very dependent on that quick finish bonus, I'm going to be underweight to the field on him. He's expected to be pretty popular. I'm only getting to him in about 20% of my lineups right now. Initially, I was going to go even lighter than that on Pereira, but as I started building out my lineups, I just really did have a little bit of difficulty finding pay-up options I was really confident in. So ended up getting to 20% Pereira here, but I will be underweight to the field on him. You could take some punt chances on Rountree just in the chance that he does land the one big shot. We know Rountree has big power, but I mean, there's some brutal losses on Rountree's record. Like I said, I thought he should have lost to Dustin Jacoby. He lost to Marcin Prachnio. He lost to Ion Cutelaba. He lost to Johnny Walker. So I don't think Rountree is a championship caliber fighter. He is nothing better than a puncher's chance to end up becoming the light heavyweight champion. Co-main event, this is the fight that I have the most overall exposure to on the card, Raquel Pennington against Juliana Pena. It's priced right in the mid-range. You've got Raquel Pennington at $8,400, Juliana Pena at $7,800. And the one thing about this fight is it's 5 rounds. I do think it's most likely to go to the judge's decision, and I think it should be fought at a decently high pace. We just saw Raquel Pennington get the title by winning against Mayra Bueno Silva, and there was a lot of output in that fight. We ended up seeing 134 significant strikes landed by Pena, 265 total strikes. She had a takedown. She had 11 minutes of control time. And then also, from what we've seen out of a lot of Juliana Pena's recent fights, she's been really aggressive in her fights against Amanda Nunes. Now, obviously, she got her ass kicked in the last one, but the previous fight, she pulled off one of the biggest upsets that we've ever seen in UFC history by beating Amanda Nunes. And she landed in that fight 79 significant strikes in a fight that ended in the middle of the second round. So I think this fight should be fought at a pretty high pace. And considering that it's priced reasonably, it's also a 5-round fight. Whoever wins, I'm pretty confident is going to be in the optimal lineup. So Raquel Pennington, I am having a little bit more confidence in her just because she's fought more recently. It's been a really long layoff for Juliana Pena. She was sitting out for the title shot. She was also dealing with a couple of different injuries, which has also led to an extended absence. So at $7,800, she is certainly worth exposure to. I have her in about 40% of my lineups. But if you're building one lineup, I'm going to lean towards the Pennington side for stuff like single entry and going to be something like 60% Raquel Pennington to 40% on Juliana Pena. So picking Pennington to win, picking to win by decision, but should be a close competitive fight, and winner I expect to score well. Jose Aldo taking on Mario Bautista. I don't totally understand the line for this fight. We've got Jose Aldo as a plus money underdog, and as a result, he's only $7,700 on DraftKings. Mario Bautista, he is more likely of the two to be the one shooting takedowns, but historically, Jose Aldo has some of the best takedown defense in all of UFC history, sitting at 91%. And also, historically, the fighters that Jose Aldo loses to, they are exclusively championship caliber fighters. Look at the history of Jose Aldo. His last loss was to Merab Dvalishvili, champion. Loss before that was against Petr Yan, champion. Loss against that was to Marlon Moraes, not a champion, but was somebody who fought for a belt and was highly ranked and was a champion outside of the UFC. Loss before that came to Alexander Volkanovski. Before that, his losses were to Max Holloway. Before that, Conor McGregor. And those are all of the losses we've ever seen Jose Aldo accrue. And Mario Bautista is just not quite on that level. I know if you look at the numbers, you would say, well, Mario Bautista is the more active striker and he lands strikes at a much higher clip. And while that is true, Jose Aldo is incredibly difficult to hit. And also you have to consider strength of opponents here. Mario Bautista has only fought fairly low-level strikers, where Jose Aldo for years has fought the best of the best. Like, what is Mario Bautista's best win? Maybe Ricky Simon, but Ricky Simon hasn't looked great in his recent fights, and he's not a good striker. He had the win over Damon Blackshear, but I thought Blackshear won that fight, and he did outstrike Mario Bautista on the feet. So that's where you kind of look at Mario Bautista's history, and it's hard to find what his actual best win is. And by a mile, Jose Aldo would be his best win, and this is the toughest test of Mario Bautista's career. So I'm going to pick Jose Aldo to win. I think it's going to be a somewhat low-scoring, striking-based decision, but because Jose Aldo is only $7,700, I do think he's worth taking chances on as an underdog. And also, this could be a spot, too, where Jose Aldo might have such a significant striking advantage that maybe it looks like the Jose Aldo versus Renato Moicano fight, where Aldo just totally beat the crap out of him on the feet and ends up getting a first-round finish. If Bautista is really outclassed on the feet, then maybe Aldo is a little bit more live for a finish than what some of the betting odds indicate. So Jose Aldo is not expected to be all that popular, only pulling 22% ownership. And I like him as an underdog, picking him to win outright. I do think the most likely outcome is by decision, but at $7,700 on a slate where there aren't that many underdogs to be really confident in, I'll be taking some shots on Aldo. Roman Dolidze taking on Kevin Holland. And I think this is a pretty good matchup for Kevin Holland. I've never been a massive fan of Dolidze. And the biggest issue I have with him is that he's, number one, just really slow. He's not a very good athlete. And the output is also very low on the Dolidze side. He is a very good finisher. So if he does get himself in opportunistic spots, particularly on top, we have seen him submit guys. We've seen him land some brutal ground and pound. But I don't know that he's going to have all that easy of a time taking down Kevin Holland, just because Kevin Holland is going to have such a big speed and athleticism advantage that I don't know that Dolidze is going to have an easy time just grabbing Kevin Holland and dragging him down to the ground. Kevin Holland's takedown defense also, it's looked improved in recent fights. I know earlier in his career, it was a massive hole for him, and I still don't think it's the strength of Kevin Holland's game, but it's better than what it used to be, and I don't know that Dolidze is just a lock to be able to go ahead and pull Kevin Holland down to the ground. And even if he does, Holland's an underrated grappler. He's a black belt. We've seen him have a handful of submission wins on his resume, but because his takedown defense is so poor, we usually just think it as, hey, if somebody is able to take Kevin Holland down, it's going to be a big advantage for them. But if this does get on the ground, I mean, I even think that Kevin Holland could potentially end up submitting Roman Dolidze off his back. This fight being priced right in the mid 8K range as well. We've got Kevin Holland just $8,300. I think that he's a good DFS target. There's a lot of output on the Kevin Holland side as well. The one issue is that Roman Dolidze has shown to have just insane durability, but he took such a beating in a recent fight. So look at the Dolidze fight against Nasruddin Imavov, where Dolidze ended up absorbing 112 significant strikes, and he actually got beat so bad in the first round that Imavov was kind of gassed out for the rest of the fight and just wasn't able to do anything. But Dolidze ended up absorbing 51 significant strikes, 69 total strikes. The fight easily could have been stopped in the first round of that one. And I do wonder how that is going to impact Dolidze's ability to absorb damage going forward, because he didn't look like the same fighter to me in the matchup against Anthony Smith. Even though he ended up winning, it was a very lackluster fight. And I am concerned that that fight against Nasruddin Imavov, that Dolidze may have left himself a part of himself in the octagon that he's never going to get back. So picking Kevin Holland to win, I think he's a good lower owned GPP target at $8,300. Also, I think he's more live for a finish than what some of the betting odds might indicate, because I do think there's a chance that Dolidze's overall durability may be a little bit compromised. One other thing to add as well, Dolidze also has poor cardio. We've seen him gas out numerous times in fights, even in fights where he wins. He's just holding on and surviving in the third round. And with this fight being taking place at altitude, that's something that's going to be important for this card. You could certainly see a scenario where Dolidze gasses out in the second or third round and just kind of gets finished based on having nothing left in the cardio department, which is something that's never been an issue for Kevin Holland. Ketlin Vieira taking on Kayla Harrison. Kayla Harrison is $9,800 for this slate. One thing that is on my mind in regards to this taking place at altitude is I do have a little bit of concern with just a few fights ago. Kayla Harrison gassed out against Larissa Pacheco and really got her ass kicked in later stages of that fight, was nearly finished in the final rounds. And I'm a little bit concerned that Kayla Harrison's cardio might not look terrific in the final rounds of this fight when it's also taking place, like we said, at altitude. It's something we haven't seen Kayla Harrison fight in to this point. I'm kind of banking on it not being a concern just because she has been in such incredible shape since coming to the UFC. It seemed like she made weight without any kind of issue. And we do know also with her high-level Olympic background that I think she's going to be ultra prepared for this fight. But I would be lying if I didn't say that in the back of my mind I have that Pacheco fight. It's something that's come to mind for me for sure. But with that said, I don't think Ketlin Vieira is a very dangerous striker. She has some power in her hands, and I do think she has the advantage in the striking over Kayla Harrison. But I think Kayla Harrison should be able to land takedowns. I think she'll be able to land trips against Ketlin Vieira. And then on top, I think she's going to be a handful for pretty much anybody in this division in the UFC. And one of the narratives about Kayla Harrison when she fought in the PFL was that she wasn't really a potent finisher and that she was somebody who was more get on top, lay and pray, hold top control position, and grind out wins. I think something that kind of got lost in that is that you're not allowed to throw elbows when you're on top in the PFL. Elbows are not allowed. So now that she's in the UFC, this is a massive weapon that's opened up for Kayla Harrison that we saw her implement against Holly Holm. So there was way more output on the Kayla Harrison side in the UFC compared to some of her PFL fights. So as a result, you see in a fight that she ended up winning in the second round against Holly Holm, she lands 51 significant strikes, 68 total strikes. So I do think she's going to be a handful when she gets on top of these girls in the UFC now that she has the ability to land elbows. So Kayla Harrison, if price wasn't a factor, I would be paying up for her as much as possible. But because she is $9,800, made her a little bit difficult to get up to. I still have her in 30% of lineups, but if she was priced like $9,500 or $9,400, I'd probably have like 40+% of Kayla Harrison. But I think she's a good option to pay up for. I do think she's a pretty safe pick to end up winning. And some of those cardio concerns from the past, I'm hoping they don't end up showing up in this fight against Ketlin Vieira. Next fight that we have to look at is, so I click on the wrong card. By the way, apologies. The Morgan Charrier fight for last week, I realized I accidentally skipped over it. I had a lot of people calling me an idiot about it on Twitter and whatnot. It was a mistake. Didn't mean to do it, but making sure very, very diligently that I click on each individual fight and don't accidentally skip any of them. But yeah, last weekend's 14 fight card, apologies, I accidentally skipped that one. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson taking on Joaquin Buckley. And if this fight was taking place a few years ago, I think I would probably be taking shots on Wonderboy as an underdog. But the reason that I like Buckley, particularly from a DFS standpoint, is his path to victory is so clear. He has to wrestle. If Buckley stays at range and strikes with Wonderboy, he loses this fight. But now we've seen Wonderboy lose numerous times in the exact same way, where he's just able to, well, not able, his opponents are able to just grapple fuck him. They push him up against the cage. They get him to the ground. They beat him up a little bit. They either submit him or they just end up grinding out a pretty decently scoring DFS win with ground and pound. And we've just seen it happen time and time again, where if the opponent does not do that against Wonderboy, he wins a striking-based decision or he gets a finish. So Shavkat Rakhmonov, second round finish against Wonderboy. A lot of cage pushing, a lot of time spent in the clinch up against the octagon. Eventually, Rakhmonov lands the takedown, gets the finish. Bilal Muhammad, 7 takedowns against Wonderboy Thompson. Gilbert Burns, 3 takedowns against Wonderboy Thompson. Also had a ton of control time. He had, 7+ minutes of control time in that spot. So there's such a clear blueprint for beating Wonderboy. And now he's also, 41 years old? When's his birthday? 41. And he turns 42 in a few months. So you're just going to see more of a degradation in the overall athleticism and the skill set of Wonderboy Thompson. And just that little bit of a decrease in speed, I think could really hurt him, particularly in his fight style, where he's so dependent on being quick on the outside, blitzing, moving in and moving out. So Buckley, it's just so obvious what the game plan is that he should be looking to wrestle. And we've seen him do it more often in recent fights. You see that he lands 1.69 takedowns per 15 minutes, which it's a decent mark, but it doesn't even really do justice to Buckley because he landed 4 takedowns against Ruzboev. He landed 2 against Morono. He landed 2 against Shafel Filio. So it's something we've seen more out of Buckley in recent fights, and he just has to do it in this spot. So when you look at Buckley at $8,800 and modest 25% ownership, I like getting overweight to Buckley because if he wins, we know that it's going to be a wrestling-based decision. So, or potentially gets him down and lands ground and pound, is able to finish him because Buckley is capable of landing some really powerful shots. So, Joaquin Buckley, he's somebody who I think is a pretty good lower-owned target for this card. This is also some of the lowest-owned lineups that I've gotten out of our sim since I've started using it. I just don't love a lot of the chalk on this slate. And there's a lot of fighters who are like 20 to 25% owned that I like more than the field does. And Buckley is one of the fighters that fits that profile. Marina Rodriguez taking on Yasmin Lucindo. This is another really low-owned fight that I think has pretty interesting potential from a DFS standpoint because we know the weakness of Marina Rodriguez. She only defends takedowns at a 65% clip. She very frequently gets stuck on the bottom as well and struggles to get up in some of those scenarios. And Lucindo is landing north of 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. And she is also coming off of 2 fights ago against Polyana Viana. We did see Lucindo land a couple of takedowns and end up getting herself a second-round submission win against a pretty good grappler in Polyana Viana. And Marina Rodriguez is just not that level of grappler. So if Lucindo comes out here and looks to grapple, I think that she could land takedowns and also get herself a submission win. However, if she does not look to wrestle, Marina Rodriguez is a handful to deal with on the feet. She lands nearly 5 significant strikes per minute. She's a very powerful striker. We saw the fight a couple of times ago against Michelle Waterson Gomez, which ended up being the retirement fight for Michelle Waterson because it was a fight where, she really got the crap beat out of her. Marina Rodriguez looked really good in that spot. She lands 70 significant strikes and gets a second-round finish. There were no knockdowns credited, but, there really could have been a couple of spots where either there could have been a knockdown scored or if the fight would have just gone a little bit longer instead of it being a mercy stoppage where Waterson was very frequently just up against the cage and just getting rained on with bombs and elbows. This could have been an even bigger score for Marina Rodriguez. And Lucindo, while I am very high on her as a prospect, she's still very green. And this is a big test for her. She's only 22 years old. And we haven't seen her fight this level of competition. She did beat Karolina Kowalkiewicz in her last fight, but it's a much aged version of Kovalevich. So big step in competition for Lucindo. Whoever wins this fight, I think they should score fairly well. And the field is just not playing it very often. 25% ownership going to Lucindo. We've got 16% ownership projected for Marina Rodriguez. I prefer the Lucindo side. I am going to pick her to win by submission, but I want to be overweight to both sides of this fight. I think there is potential for her to score really well from a DraftKings perspective. Next fight here, Austin Hubbard against Alexander Hernandez. Hernandez is the better fighter in just about all of his matchups, but he doesn't win most of them because he has poor cardio. So he wins the first round of his fights at a very, very high clip. But when the fights make it out of the first round, he typically ends up losing. And he got a fighter in Austin Hubbard who's very durable. He's hard to put away. So I think Alexander Hernandez wins the first round probably 9 out of 10 times in this spot. But then I think Austin Hubbard is going to look like the fresher fighter in the second and third round and potentially gets himself a late finish. So you look at Alexander Hernandez, looks great against Damon Jackson, is crushing him in the first round, gasses out. Damon Jackson ends up winning a split decision. Bill Algeo, Alexander Hernandez also looks pretty good in the first round, gasses out. And Bill Algeo takes over in the second and third round. Fight against Jim Miller, to Alexander Hernandez's credit, he actually looked okay through 3 rounds. Fight against Billy Q, Alexander Hernandez wins the first round, gets finished in the second round. Fight against Renato Moicano, Alexander Hernandez wins the first round, gets finished in the second round. We've just seen this play out time and time again. And with that being the case, it's not even about the skill set of Austin Hubbard. I just like his ability to survive the first round. And then also with the fight taking place at altitude, I think there's a real chance Alexander Hernandez is gassed in the second round and Hubbard comes on late and ends up winning the fight. So it's $7,600, only project for 21% ownership. Here's another contrarian punt option that I think is live for the slate that I'm going to be overweight to the field to. I'm not going to be taking that many chances on Alexander Hernandez just because I do think that based on his cardio issues, he's kind of dependent on a first round finish. And I don't think that's going to materialize against Austin Hubbard. So I'm going to pick Hubbard to win. I think it's either probably a decision or potentially a late finish. Cesar Almeida taking on Ihor Potieria. And I initially thought I was going to want to be fading Almeida in this fight. Faded him in his last fight as well against Roman Kopylov. The biggest issue I have with Almeida is he just has 0 takedown defense. So you see that he only defends takedowns at a 56% clip on paper. And then also you see spots where guys are just able to push him up against the cage, get a bunch of control time, take him down. He does, to his credit, have pretty good get up game after he's been taken down, but he just gets worn out over the course of a lot of these fights. Here's the reason why I think this is a good matchup for Almeida anyway, and why I think it's actually warranted that he's as big of a favorite as he is. Ihor Potieria has never landed a takedown in the UFC. He's attempted them. He's attempted, I think, as many as 4 takedowns in a fight against, where was it? Against Olberg? No, he didn't attempt takedowns against Olberg. It was the fight against, no, not the one against Negumereanu. I know there was one fight he attempted takedowns. Was the fight against Bresky? Yeah, against Lucas Bresky, against Robert Bracechek. He went 0 for 4 on takedown attempts in that spot. So we have seen him actually attempt to wrestle before, and he's never been able to land a takedown. 0% takedown accuracy for his career. So with that being the case, I have to assume this fight is going to take place on the feet. And when it's on the feet, Cesar Almeida, who's got a high-level kickboxing background, he is somebody who I think would have a massive advantage in the striking exchanges against Potieria. And Potieria also, we've seen him finish a handful of times. Just got finished in a fight against Michel Pereira. He got finished against Rodolfo Bellato. He got finished against Carlos Olberg. So we've seen Potieria finish in 3 of his last 4 fights. The times that he hasn't been finished was the fight against Bracechek or the fight against Mauricio Shogun Rua, who is 1 billion years old at the time of that fight. He got finished against Nikolai Negumereanu. So I think that's what happens here. I think this fight takes place on the feet, and I think that Cesar Almeida is going to end up finishing Ihor Potieria. Cesar Almeida, $9,400. I'd rather pay up for Kayla Harrison if possible, but Cesar Almeida at $9,400, being $200 cheaper than Alex Pereira, I have found it a little bit easier to get to Almeida. So 27% of my lineups, he's projected for right around 30% ownership. So I'm coming in a little bit underweight to the field on Almeida, but I think he's a perfectly viable spend-up option, and I'm not really looking to take chances on Potieria. If he had landed just a couple of takedowns in his history in some of these other fights, then I would say there was a real path to victory for him. But without him landing those takedowns, I think that he is going to be dependent on knocking out a kickboxer who has a very high level kickboxing background. And I just don't think it's a likely scenario. So I think Almeida wins and probably gets a finish in the first or second round. Ryan Spann taking on Ovince St. Preux. These are two extremely untrustworthy fighters. This could turn into a meme fight at altitude as well, where these guys just completely, totally gas out potentially. Ryan Spann's really talented. He just comes into fights with the dumbest game plans you've ever seen. If it's a fight where he should be wrestling, he's striking. It's a fight where he should be striking, he's wrestling. He gets himself stuck in submissions. So it's really hard to trust Ryan Spann. It's also hard to trust Ovince St. Preux now that he's 40 years old himself. So I look at this fight as being one that the reason I want to target for DFS purposes is it is very likely to finish inside the distance. We currently have the prop set. It's minus 125 to finish under 1.5 rounds. So I don't have like an uber amount of confidence in Spann or Ovince St. Preux, but I do have a pretty good amount of confidence the fight is going to end inside the distance. Ryan Spann at $9,200 is 33% owned. I'm right in line with the field on that. But OSP only 21% owned. I'm going to be a little bit heavier on his side. OSP also, maybe this has something to do with USADA no longer being in the mix. He looked as good as he's looked in years his last time out against Kennedy and Sechiku, where also there was a crazy amount of volume from OSP that we've really never seen from him before. So he ended up landing in that fight. 143 significant strikes and a knockdown, ended up winning a decision. I know it was a split, but that should have been a clear win for OSP in that spot. I didn't think there was any argument for Nsechiku on the other side. So if OSP comes out and looks the same way he did against Kennedy and Nsechiku, I think this is a much closer fight than the betting line indicates against Ryan Spann. And like I said, whoever wins, I think it should score well more often than not. Minus 125 to finish inside 1.5 rounds. I'll pick Spann to win as the younger fighter, but with basically no confidence, but good fight to be targeting for DFS purposes. I like OSP as another low-owned underdog play. Carla Esparza against Tisha Pennington. This is going to be a retirement fight for Carla Esparza. It's hard for me to have any kind of confidence in her, though. We've not seen her fight in a very long time now. She's also coming off a pregnancy. That's part of the reason for the long layoff. And now she says that she's just doing one more fight for the Cookie Monster fans. I don't know who it is that's clamoring, saying we need one more fight out of Carla Esparza, but she's coming back and doing one more fight for whatever fan she has left after putting on the worst title performance ever against Rose Namajunas and then getting dominated against Zhang Weili and then the 2-year layoff. So I think there's a tough matchup for her as well against Tisha Pennington. Pennington historically has had pretty good takedown defense. And when she does get taken down in recent fights, it's only against the highest of high-level opponents. And there was a point in time where Carla Esparza was at that level. She's beaten Rose Namajunas twice in title fights, although one of them was a very lackluster fight. But I just don't know what to expect from Carla Esparza. 2-year layoff, coming off the pregnancy. So Tisha Pennington, I think she wins a striking-based decision, but she's $8,700, and that's just really hard to see a path for her to being in the optimal lineup, unless Esparza is just so washed that Tisha Pennington completely runs over her. So picking Pennington to win, pick her to win by decision, but there's much better fights to be targeting on this card. Let's see, what's my exposure to Pennington? Yeah, I don't have like any of her. I've got her in, well, she is in 20% a lot. I'm dialing that back. I'm not playing 20% of Tisha Torres / Tisha Pennington. One of these scenarios where I'm going to disagree with our Sims a little bit, and I'll give her a negative ROI boost to weed her out of some lineups. I just don't see a real path to her being in the winning lineup. Court McGee taking on Tim Means, and just two really old guys fighting here. You've got Tim Means, 40 years old, Court McGee, 39, but turning 40 in a couple of months. It's really hard for me to look at either of these fighters and feel great about them. They both looked really washed in the recent fights. Tim Means just got absolutely starched against Uros Medic. He's also lost 4 of his last 5 fights now. Court McGee on the other side, he's lost 3 fights in a row. He got finished in 2 of them. And there was a point in time you could look at Court McGee and you knew that no matter what, he was going to be really durable and he was going to fight all 3 rounds and he was going to be tough to put away. That's just not the case anymore. And then even his last fight against Alex Morono, it went 3 rounds, but he got 60 significant strikes landed out of Court McGee in the fight. It was not really a good effort or performance there. Considering these guys are so old, there's a potential for one of them to gas. There's potential for a durability issue where one of these guys just gets hit and goes out cold like we saw in the fight. Where was it? Court McGee fought against, Jeremiah Wells, where the first clean strike the Wells landed of the entire fight. It just put Court McGee completely out and unconscious. So whatever the field ends up doing here, I'm just going to align myself with the field. I don't want this to be the fight that ends up making or breaking me. So Tim Means project for 23% ownership. I've got him in 22% of lineups. Court McGee project for 25% ownership. I have him in 17% of lineups. Not a fight that I'm going to be all that invested in, nor that I'm super interested in. So one that I'll just align myself with the field. Whatever the field does with exposure, I'll do that as well. You can see a case where either fighter gets a finish, but it's not what I think is the most likely outcome. Fight is also minus 160 to go to the judges' scorecards. So that is going to do it for us today, guys. If you have not done yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for any of the tools we have here at Stokastic, including the Sims tool for MMA, sign up using the link that we have down below in the YouTube description box. Got a handful of different packages. We've got data packages. We've got our simulation packages. We've got our single lineup sim. So if you're somebody who just plays 1, 2, 3 lineups and you just want to hand build that lineup and simulate it to see what its expected ROI is, we have that as well. And if you're playing hockey, if you're somebody who plays NHL DFS, we do have a promo going on for that as well. Promo code is NHL24. You get 5 days of our NHL package for just $1. So if you're going to be building NHL lineups, you can't beat the price of $1. So other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. Good luck with this weekend's card. I'll see you back here next week.